Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The Banshee, from the Irish Bean Shea, woman of the side or woman of the fairy mounds, is a female spirit in Irish mythology, usually seen as an omen of death and a messenger from the other world. Her Scottish counterpart is the Bean Shith. According to tradition, the Banshee can only cry for 5 major Irish families: the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Gradys, and the Kavanaghs. Intermarriage has since extended this select list. Individuals have described the Irish Banshee in numerous ways. Many describe this mythical creature as a young, beautiful woman. Then, there are some that describe the Banshee as a matron. In some tales, the figure who first appears to be a Banshee is later revealed to be the Irish battle goddess, the Morrigan. The hag may also appear as a washerwoman who cleans the blood-stained clothes of those who are about to die. Although not always visible, her morning call is heard, usually at night when someone is about to die and usually near woodlands. The Banshee may also appear in a variety of other forms, such as that of a crow, hare, and weasel, most any animal associated in Ireland with witchcraft. Banshees are frequently described as dressed in white or grey, often having long, fair hair which they brush with a silver comb. In 1437, King James I of Scotland was approached by an Irish seeress or banshee who foretold his murder at the instigation of the Earl of Atholl. This is an example of the banshee in human form. There are records of several human banshees or prophetesses attending the great houses of Ireland and the courts of local Irish kings. The Irish banshee, according to the people of Ireland, may come in the form of one of many different animals. This is partly due to the fact that the actual female version of the banshee is not always seen in that form. However, several animals have been said to emit the same sounds as the mythical creature makes when forewarning of tragedy. This sound is called the morning call. In some cases, no animal or female figure is seen, but the call can be heard coming from the dark, mysterious depths of the forests located throughout Ireland. The Banshee of Ireland is a very interesting legend. All throughout history, there have been accounts regarding the sightings of this mythical creature. Is she real? There is no physical evidence apart from witness accounts and tales passed from one generation to another, but for those in Ireland, this is a very real mythical creature. For the rest of us, it is truly one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. One of the Banshee legends. There was an Irish gentleman who had a beautiful daughter, strong and healthy, and a splendid horsewoman. She always followed the hounds, and her appearance at the hunt attracted unbounded admiration, as no one rode so well or looked so beautiful. One evening there was a ball after the hunt, and the young girl moved through the dance with the grace of a fairy queen. But that same night a voice came close to the father's window, as if the face were laid close to the glass, and he heard a mournful lamentation and a cry, and the words rang out on the air.
In 3 weeks death, in 3 weeks the grave, dead, dead, dead.
3 times the voice came, and 3 times he heard the words, but though it was bright moonlight, and he looked from the window over all the park, no form was to be seen. Next day, his daughter showed symptoms of fever, and exactly in 3 weeks, as the Banshee had prophesied, the beautiful girl lay dead. The night before her death, soft music was heard outside the house, though no word was spoken by the spirit voice, and the family said the form of a woman crouched beneath a tree, with a mantle covering her head, was distinctly visible. But on approaching, the phantom disappeared, though the soft, low music of the lamentation continued till dawn. Then the angel of death entered the house with soundless feet, and he breathed upon the beautiful face of the young girl, and she rested in the sleep of the dead, beneath the dark shadows of his wings. Thus the prophecy of the Banshee came true, according to the time foretold by the spirit voice. Another Banshee legend. In about the middle of the 19th century lived the Reverend Charles Bunworth of County Cork. Mr. Bunworth became deathly ill. His wife was not too worried because it looked like his health was improving. A servant of the household knew his master was going to die. He heard the dreaded wail along with several others. He tells his story.
As I came through the glen at Bellabeg, she was along with me, screeching and keening and clapping her hands by my side every step of the way, with her long white hair falling about her shoulders, and I could hear her repeat the master's name every now and then as plain as ever I heard it. When I came to the old abbey, she parted from me there, and turned into the pigeon field next to the barren ground, and folding her cloak about her, down she sat under the tree that was struck by lightning, and began keening so bitterly that it went through one's heart to hear it.
Mrs. Bunworth dismissed this as superstition because her husband's health was getting better. A few nights later, a low moaning accompanied by the sound of clapping was heard outside of Mr. Bunworth's window. 2 men visiting the house immediately ran outside to find the source of the sound. They found nothing and heard only silence. Meanwhile, the people still in the house kept hearing the wailing and moaning and clapping. This continued for hours. All the while Mr. Bunworth began slipping away. He was dead by the morning. This just goes to show you that once someone has heard a banshee, death is not far behind.
There are also tales of a banshee in the Badlands of South Dakota. Thought to have been either a deceased settler or a native woman who was killed there, the banshee's cries have chilled the blood of many cowboys and prospectors. By moonlight, when the scenery is most suggestive and unearthly, and the noises of wolves and owls inspire uneasy feelings, the banshee is seen with her hair blowing, her arms tossing in strange gestures. If war parties, emigrants, cowboys, hunters, any who for good or ill are going through haunted country, the rocks are lighted with phosphor flashes and the banshee sweeps upon them. As if wishing to speak, or as if waiting a question that it has occurred to none to ask, she stands beside them in an attitude of appeal, but if asked what she wants she flings her arms aloft and with a shriek that echoes through the blasted gulches for a mile she disappears and an instant later is seen wringing her hands. Sometimes the banshee is accompanied by an unfleshed skeleton that trudges about the ash and clay and haunts the camps in a search for music. If he hears it he will sit outside the door and nod in time to it, while a violin left within his reach is eagerly seized and will be played on through half the night.
I was out on a jog with my brother in the back end of nowhere. It's a loop around a lake in which you have to go through fields, and a portion of this trail is tarmacadaimed here in West Ireland. My brother parked near a gate at the start of the trail, and the plan was that I would run to the start and he would run to the end so that we could meet in the middle and walk back. When I had started to jog I had to go up through the first field which was flooded due to the constant rain the day before. After I had gotten through the field I had reached the tarmacadaimed road which was surrounded by huge sand dune hills. I had started to jog along the road when I had a rushing feeling of dread, like I was being watched by someone or something. I was at least 2 miles from the start of the tarmacadaimed road when I had come into a clearing, just an open field with 2 oak trees. These trees looked like they had been extremely weathered with branches falling off, and the trunk of the tree bent out of shape, almost like a bench. I thought that was a little weird because oak trees are hard, thick and sturdy trees. So for the weather to have done this in an area that was surrounded by huge sand dunes was impossible. I have really bad asthma and have to take breaks to catch my breath every so often when running or jogging. I had sat down on this bent oak tree when I noticed this small bone comb on the oak tree that filled me with absolute dread, almost like when you are falling in a dream and there's nothing you can do. I reached out to touch the bone comb when I heard this blood-curdling scream from behind me. I shot up and looked behind to no avail, nothing was there. Being definitely spooked, I checked around the trunk and nothing. I continued on my jog, running on the trail all the while still feeling this overwhelming feeling of dread. After about 30 minutes of jogging down this trail I see my brother jogging towards me around the corner road. He did not want to ruin his time, because he times his runs, jog cycles, etc. He jogged ahead of me, and due to me running for the last 30 minutes, I had no choice but to walk and take breaks often to catch my breath. By the time my brother was out of my view, something was off. I was definitely being watched. I looked behind me to see a small old Irish woman with gray hair and traditional clothes looking at me with a blank expression. She slowly opened her mouth and let out a blood-curdling scream. I ran faster than I knew I possibly could. I ran past my brother after about 5 minutes, who was at least 1.5 miles down the trail, and was almost at the end by the car when I reached my brother's car. I sat in. I did not talk to anyone, not even my mother. I walked down to my room and just slept through my trauma, which was unusual for me because it was 5:03 p.m. and I never sleep during the day.
My mum's side of the family is Irish. Growing up, I always had a slight accent which thickened after spending time with my grandparents. My grandfather is probably the most important person in my life. He lives in a small village in County Roscommon, Central Ireland. I love him very much and was practically his shadow when I was younger. Wherever he was, I was 2 steps behind him. Our favorite thing to do together was sitting in front of the fire with our cups of tea and biscuits, and he'd tell me stories. Some about his childhood, some works of fiction, some life lessons, and some would be so spooky that I had to sleep on the floor next to his and Nana's bed. But my favorite stories were the stories based on folklore, especially the Banshee. For those of you who don't know the legend of the Banshee, my grandfather explained to me that the Banshee was the full-body apparition of a woman so beautiful, it was almost unnatural, with pale skin and long bright hair. She had been cursed with the ability to foresee the death of people, and her responsibility with this curse is to be the messenger of death. He would say that if I was to ever hear her crying or ever heard her scream, I would know that the life of a loved one would soon be over. Something that he would always make a point to say was that the Banshee wasn't an evil or malicious spirit. She was simply sick of seeing death and hated being the one to tell people that death was at hand. I always enjoyed hearing stories about her. I never thought she was real. I was always under the impression that the Banshee was just another work of fiction by my grandfather. But she's real. I can tell you that. My first encounter was when I was 12. I have always been supernaturally sensitive. I used to see my great-grandparents almost every night. My great-nana would tuck me in and my great-pop would whistle until I fell asleep. Anyways, I was at my grandparents' farm walking around early in the morning with my dog, Bowie. It was winter, so you can imagine it was freezing. Probably around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, so I was bundled up like a little burrito strolling around the property, Bowie and I checking on the sheep, cows, and bulls. I had made a decent amount of distance between the house and myself, so I decided to sit on a rock next to a small stream just in front of the bushland. Not long after doing so, I began to hear a strange noise. I didn't know if it was the wind or a fox, possibly a guinea fowl. Bowie had heard it too. A very low growl was coming from his mouth. I felt a cloud of dread settle in my stomach. I didn't think I was alone anymore. I knew something was wrong. I took off my ear covers and pushed my beanie above and behind my ears. The noise was coming from the trees behind me. The only way I can describe what I heard that day is sadness. It just sounded like despair. I stood and moved closer to the trees, Bowie showing his protest by growling much louder. Then, the figure of a person emerged from the early morning fog. It was walking. No, it was floating ever so slowly. The noise is clearer. They're crying like they had just received the most terrible, awful news imaginable. As I walked closer, my curiosity got the better of me. The floating figure comes closer as well. It's a woman. The most stunningly beautiful woman I have ever seen, in a long silver evening gown that's seen its fair share of bad days. Her hair was windswept and orange like a burning fire. Her eyes, however, looked as though they belonged to another person. They were tired and puffy, red as if they had been shedding tears every day for the past decades. Those eyes met mine. They stopped crying for a few seconds. I stared in a trance and the world around me seemed to have stopped. After the longest minute I have ever lived through, her mouth opened in a sickeningly inhuman way, and an eardrum-piercing, blood-curdling scream emanated from it. Bowie began to bark and snarl at the woman, then ran off back to the house. I didn't move, I didn't cover my ears, I stared at her. I wasn't thinking, I don't even know what I was doing. She finally stopped the dreadful scream, not breaking eye contact. She mumbled something under her breath. This is when I got my senses and backed away quickly, turned around and booked it back to the house. When I reached the gate I turned back, and she was gone. But I still felt her presence. I shook off my uneasy feeling and ran to find my grandfather. He was carrying wood from the shed to the house. I fell to my knees and cried. I couldn't get out anything but a single sentence. I saw a banshee. A week later my cousin died in her sleep. Her heart had just stopped.
This happened in my freshman year in college. My friends and I all decided to go to Denny's, which is a sit-out, sit-down, eat-out restaurant. We weren't under the influence of anything. So, we're driving down this road and it's dark. It's our first time deciding to drive somewhere we don't know the exact location. It was just going off of somebody telling us where to go. Now we're going down this road and it's really dark. And there's like maybe 2 light posts and I'm talking about maybe a 5-mile distance. So there's 4 of us in the car. I'm sitting in the back seat on the left side and my friend is sitting on the right side. So he's looking out the back window and he's just staring and he's just like, and I look back too and he's just like, man, this road looks scary. I look back and I was like, yeah, it does look kinda scary, you know. I was kinda scared. So, for some reason, we just kept looking back and next thing we know we see this, like a figure. I don't know how to truly explain it, but it was like a white figure from far away. It was like way down the street, but it was like keeping up with the car. It was keeping up with the car even though it was far. I was like, what in the world? So, this one light pole comes up and as we are looking back as the side of the light comes over it, it speeds up to the car faster than we were going and we were going at least 50 miles per hour. When I saw this figure, it was in the shape of a woman. Caucasian, maybe in her 20s. Very ghostly. I could see through it and it was like, I saw a white gown on her and it was like, I couldn't see her feet. But when I saw that, how close it came, it was maybe like 20 feet from the car and I turned around and I said, I yelled out really loud. When I turned around, it was gone. My friend said, when I told them I didn't see any feet, but my friend said he saw feet running really, extremely fast, like something out of a movie fast.
When I was 12, me and my younger brother used to travel up over the border to a small town in Northern Ireland. to visit our father as my parents had divorced. My dad, being a firm Protestant, insisted we rejoin a Protestant scout group called the Boys' Brigade. We had left it a good few years prior due to moving across the country, and there being no installation where we had moved. So now that we could attend it again, we were drafted in and off we went. For anyone wondering, it isn't at all like American Scouts. It's like Sunday school, plus you sit around, read scripture, learn marching drills, play football, dodgeball, etc., all inside a massive church hall, and then every so often you would go on day trips off to different places. This one particular trip had us going off for an overnight weekend stay in some adventure camping compound way up in the forest adjacent to a coastal town. Rock climbing, kayaking, orienteering, etc., but much more controlled and set out. It would be less like wild camping, more like show up to this place, get our own dorm rooms with bunk beds in them, wake up and have breakfast in the cafeteria. Then go do some activities, go get dinner, and finally go back to dorms for the night. So upon getting to my dorm room, I picked the top bunk next to the window, and when it came time to sleep, I was laying on my side looking out when I noticed there was an old tree stump directly ahead of me. The stump was directly ahead in a straight line as you exited the dorm complex, so anyone walking out to go get breakfast in the morning would see it. You couldn't not notice it as it was just there. So the next morning I woke up late and everyone else was already walking down to get breakfast, so I pulled my clothes on and ran down to catch up, and as I exited the main doors I saw a woman in a white dress sitting under the tree stump just combing her hair. Now this woman had bare feet and she did not look like she belonged there. Remember, this compound was completely empty barring us scout boys and our brigade leaders, so seeing any type of person there would raise some alarm bell, but the fact it was a woman in a clean white dress with bare feet in the middle of a compound, a forest, just combing her hair was just unnatural. I rubbed my eyes as I knew I was seeing things, and nope, still there. So I did what any scared boy would do. I ran the hell out of there back up to my dorm room and nervously looked out the window to see that she now gone. I waited until a brigade leader came up to tell me to get out to breakfast and told him what I saw. He didn't buy it for a second and ushered me out the door. The next day we went home, but it has stuck with me all these years. Supernatural or not, it wasn't normal and still gives me shivers thinking about. There was no rhyme or reason, even if it was just a normal woman, to be there. I'll try to find photos of the place, but I can't give exact locations for obvious reasons. Just know it was the east coast of Northern Ireland.
My parents came to New York from Ireland in the 1950s. They were strict Catholics and did not speak about supernatural things too much. But every Thanksgiving we would sit around the table and they would tell us ghost stories. One of the stories they would tell was about the Banshee. The Banshee is an Irish spirit that foretells the death of a family member by wailing and crying outside the family home. She cries for certain Irish family members, the very old Irish families, the O'Neill, the O'Brien, the O'Connor and Kavanagh families are some. Supposedly there are only 6 or 8 families. Years had passed and I was in my bedroom cleaning out my drawers of my bureau. I was standing next to my bedroom window. We lived in an apartment that was on the 5th floor. The window faced out into an alleyway. It was dusk when the crying started. First, it sounded like a newborn or a cat crying. Now I knew my neighbors and did not know of anyone that had a newborn, but it was an alleyway and so I thought it was probably a cat. But the crying changed into a young child crying or sobbing, and it was the saddest cry I have ever heard. I tried to lift up my window to call out to the person crying. I thought it was Tommy Kavanagh next door. I yelled out because I could not see anything because there was no light and it was dark by now. There was no answer, just crying. I yelled out, "Tommy, is that you? Are you okay? Do you need help?" No answer, just more crying. The sobbing changed again to a woman's sobs. Again, heartbreak-sounding sobs coming from an unknown source. My mom came into my room and the crying stopped. I said to my mom, "Don't you hear that crying? It sounds like someone is really hurt."
I don't hear anything.
She was in the living room. The apartment was not that big. She should have heard the crying. She looked at me very funny and shook her head. When she left the room, the crying started. This was not a crying that was from someone being physically hurt. This was a cry that someone was just told the worst news possible and her heart was broken. That's the only way I can describe it. The crying stopped and I went about my business. 3 days later at 5:30 in the morning, my father's sister called to tell him their sister Kathleen died. She had leukemia. I forgot to mention our last name is O'Connor.
Okay, I'll start off by telling you that the first set of repeated occurrences in my story happened over a period of around 3 weeks, in February or March 2015. Usually, my friend and I would play Xbox online for hours at night after school because, well, that's what friends do. This night was no different. Everyone in my house was asleep except for me. We were playing GTA 5 and doing the typical Grand Theft Auto massacring of the city folk as usual. He was talking to me about something through my headset which I don't remember, when I heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream right outside my window. The only way to describe it is to imagine someone being burned alive, or being slowly tortured. My room was in the basement and I had the usual small windows toward the ceiling to put this into perspective. The scream lasted for a good 4 to 5 seconds, which doesn't sound like long, but the immense fear makes it feel much longer. I interrupted my friend to tell him I had just heard something absolutely terrifying, to which his reply was, "Oh, that's weird. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's a joke and he knows about it." Well, I don't have many friends and they wouldn't do that. I mean, I could feel the scream inside me, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I got mad because he didn't believe me, but then eventually calmed down and just forgot about it. About 2 days passed and nothing really was going on that day since it was a Saturday. It was light out, and I went to take the trash out that was in the garage when I heard it again. That same Bloody Mary scream I had heard a couple days ago outside and down the road it sounded. It almost immobilized me with fear. Then, I shook it off and decided to find out what that was. I walked through the house and went to the front door. My younger sister was sitting on the couch listening to music and I asked her if she heard that with a raised voice. She said that she did but didn't care. What was going on, I thought. Why did no one else feel any attraction to these instances? I opened the front door and looked down the road. No person on fire, no one lying in the road half dead. Nothing. Was I going crazy? I went back in the house feeling total confusion. Now fast forward maybe a week. I was playing my Xbox alone during the day, but I don't know which day. I had started to remember the screams and that I would be prepared for anything should it happen again, when something interrupts my train of thought. I hear the scream right outside my window again. The fear this sound produces is unmatched, even though I was waiting for it. I paused the game and ran upstairs and flew open the door only to find my next-door neighbor looking right into my eyes with sheer panic as she frantically backed out of her driveway. She sped off like a bat out of hell. Oh my God, I thought, what's going on? Oddly, the friendship, that was 7 years, had stopped. Involuntarily. I don't know if the screams caused it, but I had another friend who had moved back into town and I told him about it. He was shocked and confused as well as to who or what caused the sounds. We drove around town all the time for hours every day, and one night he was very silent. I asked him what was up and he said, "I heard the scream. The one you spoke about. I heard it in my house, in my basement, when I was home alone." Somehow I felt good about what had happened to him. Someone had experienced what I had and I didn't feel crazy. I asked him what it was like and he said it was like someone was dying in his house, but inside he knew that there wasn't. He said for him, the scream was a woman's voice. I didn't know what that meant, so I decided to look it up on the internet. I couldn't find anything, well, other than old folk tales of the Banshee scream. We just decided to shrug it off and go on with our daily lives then. 2 days later he texted me in the middle of the night saying he had heard it again. He had been sleeping in his car, far away from his house for fear he might hear it again. He was at the park and he said he had heard an even more horrifying scream coming from the woods. Unbelievably, he still slept there. I mean, I would have driven to the next town if I was him to avoid that sound. We looked it up again only to find out nothing. They stopped. We still don't know what had happened during those occurrences. Was this all a big joke? Were we going crazy? I don't know, but to this day, I still don't know what caused those petrifying screams.
I live in a small town in rural Appalachia. The entire area was heavily settled by Irish immigrants over 150 years ago. They brought along their traditions, superstitions and folklore, and well, a few other things followed along as well. As a child, me and the neighbor boy Mike used to go down and play in the creek together. It was our favorite pastime. We would catch minnows and crawfish, build little dams with rocks and mud and swim in some of the deeper pools. We used to spend every summer like this, that is, until the summer we both turned 12. It was a hot June day and we had been swimming in a deep pool that lies a couple miles downstream from our houses. When it was evening time we started the long walk back. We were deep in conversation when we came around a bend in the creek, and sitting there on a boulder beside the water was a small, beautiful woman. She was wearing an emerald green dress covered by a gray cloak. Her hair was incredibly long and she was brushing it with a silver brush. We both froze and stared. We knew everyone who lived along the creek and neither one of us had seen her before. Her beauty was stunning. After a minute or two, but what seemed like an eternity, she looked up at us. Her appearance immediately changed. Soft and smooth white skin seemed to melt into gray lumpy clay. Her beautiful face now looked more like a half-rotted corpse and her long, luscious hair fell off in clumps. And then this dead thing began to wail the most blood-curdling and awful sound that I have ever heard. We took off running and ran all the way to Mike's house. When we arrived we found his mother sobbing uncontrollably and she looked pale as a ghost. She informed us that Mike's father, a mechanic by trade, had been working under a car when one of the jack stands had given way. His head was crushed and he died instantly. Mike and his mother moved away a few months after that. I haven't seen him or talked to him since then, though I often think back on this day. Mike's family name was O'Brien and mine is O'Neill. As an adult I've started doing a lot of research on my Irish family heritage and I happened to come across old legends of the Banshee. It is said that each of the original families of Ireland had their own Banshee, a form of the fae that would herald the death of a family member with her awful wailing or keening. And then yesterday, as I sat on my back porch sipping on my whiskey, I heard the most blood-curdling and awful sound that I've heard once before.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.